My sister-in-law just dropped off lots and lots of salvaged pine, and she's asked if I can make a piece of furniture for her out of it, and I don't usually use pine for making furniture, and I'll explain why throughout this video. But first, I need to process all of this wood and find out what pieces are usable. So we've got this old pine door which is falling to pieces, an old cabinet with a glass door, and whoever made this clearly didn't account for wood movement on that top panel. And randomly, it has this little window in one of the side panels. I wonder what that was for. These, I think, are old scaffold boards. Then there's quite a few pieces of architrave, some old pitch pine floorboards with a really nice tight grain, and these pieces are just offcuts from doors. I think this stuff's going to end up as firewood. So starting with this cabinet, and this is actually the thing that my sister-in-law was using as a temporary unit under her TV in the space where the thing that I'm going to be building in this video is designed to go to replace it. She asked for something that would fit the space better, with lots of open shelving in kind of a random pattern, and I wanted to make something that would complement the other furniture nearby. So basically rustic pine vibes, but with a contemporary twist. So while I get all this wood processed, I'll explain the first of 7 reasons why I don't make furniture from pine. And this first one's a personal thing really. When I first started making furniture about 12-ish years ago, pine was all I could get my hands on, and after maybe 5 years or so of using nothing but pine, it got a bit boring. I've always predominantly used salvaged wood for my projects, and pine was always easy to find, whereas hardwoods, especially the nicer species, were much harder to come by. I've got loads of nails to remove from these boards, and I'll use this denailing tool which I bought about a year ago, which has been absolutely brilliant. I'll leave a link to this in the description box. Next, I'm cutting a fresh square end to each of the boards just to help me figure out how much material here is going to be usable. And then I organise the boards into piles based on their thickness. I can then measure each board and jot it all down in a notepad to help me figure out what I can design based on the wood that I have available. And it was at this point where I set myself a bit of a personal mission. Could I build this entire thing using only the wood that is here? It seemed unlikely, seeing as what I'm building is going to be quite big, but it was going to be fun to try. The second reason I don't tend to work with pine is because I'm not a fan of the look of the knots and imperfections that it tends to come with. It's rare to find a nice straight-grained piece of pine without any defects. I'll start by building the carcass of the unit using all the longer and wider boards, and then I'll figure out what's going to be inside with whatever boards are left over. What I'm building is going to be rustic. There's no getting away from that with the amount of nail holes and defects in the wood that I have to work with. There was also some rot and woodworm damage on a couple of the boards that I want to cut away and get rid of. Although I don't often build furniture in a rustic style anymore, mainly because I tend to enjoy building mid-century style furniture instead, which tends to require wood and woodworking techniques that are a bit more refined, doing something in a rustic style again after all these years is going to be quite a nostalgic process for me, and I was quite excited by that. It's going to be the type of project I might have done 10 years ago, but hopefully better because I've learned a lot since then. Some of the thicker boards I need to mill down much thinner, but before I run them through my planer, I'm running a sander over them first just to clean them up a bit. I don't want my blades to go dull with any old finishes or grit that might be on this wood. I also need to check for any old nails or screws that might be embedded in the wood, so I use a magnet for that, and when I find them I just punch them deeper into the wood. The third reason I don't like working with pine is workability. It splinters really easily, so a lot of repairs will be needed throughout this project. It's also much softer than most of the woods that I prefer to use and less dense. So for example, when you clamp it up, you tend to get indentations like this. I should have used a sacrificial block over this to protect the wood. Now I'll have to sand this out because I don't like how it looks. Once these boards are planed down to the right thickness, the faces are going to be clean, almost too clean for the rustic nature of this project, but as pine is so soft, it'll get dinged up and gain some character in no time. Speaking of rustic character, I deliberately incorporated this board with some through joinery in it in the top panel because I want it to be visible. It highlights that the wood is reclaimed and has some history behind it. I'm going to be using dominoes to get the boards aligned. Alignment is never going to be perfect on these boards though, because I didn't mill up both faces, again because I wanted to retain the character. And this is about as time consuming as these projects come really, working with reclaimed timber like this. Just because it's going to be rustic doesn't mean it'll be quicker or easier to make. One thing I like to do to ensure that the panels stay straight when assembled is to clamp on these metal bars that came from an old desk. Some of the boards needed their edges planed straight before being glued up to remove small gaps between the boards. Each panel then gets sanded wherever needed at 80 and then 120 grit. I say wherever needed as I don't want to sand away any more of that precious character than I need to. Some of the boards were so rough though that I even resorted to using a belt sander before the random orbit sander just to help get them smoother and more even quicker. Another reason I don't like using pine is the variation in quality between different species, which is going to be a big challenge to tackle on this project. Species like spruce are great for construction, but they are so soft and fast grown that they are prone to twisting and warping, especially when you compare it to a good quality redwood or pitched pine. Spruce is also much whiter in colour, and even though it will darken with age, it's never going to match these older boards without a bit of help. So I got all my tinted waxes out of the cupboard and started experimenting. And this medium oak wax from Liberon was by far the best colour. It has all the aged subtle brown tones I wanted without the harsh yellow and orange tones. Once the wax is fully dry, it's an excellent match. I can also knock the colour back a bit with sandpaper where needed. And that brings me on to the fifth reason I don't tend to use pine. I don't like how it ambers or turns a bit orange over time with age, or with any oil-based finish that gets applied to it. I'm cutting a rebate on the back edge of the carcass panels, which will later hold a back panel. I rip all my panels to width, and then I can cut the joinery ready to get it assembled. But before I do that, I'm going to grab a piece of architrave and use this to mark up what height I want my bottom shelf to be onto the side panels, as I'll be making use of this architrave later. For now, I'm just getting the side and bottom panels together. I'll need access from the top for what's going to fit inside later on, and I'm just adding a board as a spacer clamped in place to keep the spacing consistent top and bottom. The sixth reason I'm not a fan of pine is that it's prone to pigtail marks when sanding, especially if you apply any type of dye to it afterwards, which only highlights it, which is what happened on this particular board. So more sanding is required here, and more sanding is never a good thing. So this is the pile of pine that I have left now, and this mission that I've set myself of trying to just use this is looking pretty unlikely now for what I want to do with the shelving inside the cabinet. I do, however, have a couple of pieces of pine up here that I think will help. Oh, and a couple of pieces up here too, by the looks of things. I get these boards through the planer to clean them up, and they were the perfect length for the long shelves I needed to make inside the unit. For the edges, I'm not going to round them over, I just want to ease over the edges in a somewhat uneven fashion. Right, I've pulled out the rest of the bits of wood I'm going to need to make the shelves that will be inside this unit. So I just need to get those glued up into panels. And I've decided what I want to do on the inside is something that looks like this. It's kind of a random pattern, but it's also symmetrical diagonally, which means these pieces, and these pieces are all identical. So it looks kind of random, but also well balanced, I think. So after gluing up the rest of the panels for the shelves and trimming them down to size, I can get the inside component assembled. So that took a lot of work, mainly because I wanted the internal component offset from both the front and back edges of the carcass by around 15mm, which made all the marking and joinery a bit more complicated. One thing that was bothering me was that the pieces of pine that I'd added from my own collection looked a bit too clean in comparison with the rest of the wood, so I punched some holes in with a nail punch and added some of that coloured wax. The top panel was quite uneven in colour, so I did some more work with the coloured wax just on the lighter areas, and then knocked it all back with some steel wool and clear wax just to help it blend in a bit better. And once dry, I was much happier with it. The rest of the unit got a coat of clear wax, and you'll see here that I added a couple of beads at the top just to provide some more gluing surface when I secured the top. Time to make a back panel using some 6mm MR MDF. After adding a coat of primer, I decided I could add some colour, just to put a bit of a modern spin on this project. And I had this tin of red paint, which seemed to be a good match for the colour on the feature wall in the room where this will be. I wasn't certain whether my sister-in-law would like it though, so I took the safe option and used screws to secure the back panel, rather than nails, just in case I need to remove it and repaint it, and keep watching to find out if she liked it or not very soon.
God, that is fantastic! God, you're clever! It is! Oh my god, and the colours are fab!
I thought they kind of matched your red wall.
They 100% do!
So there we have it, one happy sister-in-law. Thanks for watching.